Welcome back. So the title of this mini lecture is the USCT, which is the acronym for the organization or bureau for black soldiers in the U.S. Army during the American Civil War. And we're going to talk about 5 things that, as you read more about this topic, as you learn more about this topic, it's good to key in on in order to get a sense of their experiences. So let's get into it. So the first is going to be Black Confederate myth. Okay, so when we're talking about service in armies during the Civil War, right? You've got the U.S. Army, you've got the Confederate military organization and apparatuses. In the last century or so, the Confederate veterans organizations have pushed a myth that says that black men served honorably in the Confederate Army by the tens of thousands. And they will show photos of individuals wearing tunics, military tunics, maybe armed with knives, this kind of thing. And in one case, a group of black men wearing military uniforms, and they'll kind of parade these around the internet as a demonstration of, see, look, that proves our case. Couple issues. One, if it's an individual black man wearing a Confederate Army tunic, he's usually a camp slave. He's an enslaved individual to the white man who is sitting next to him with a gun. Secondly, if it's the Louisiana Home Guard photo that you see, right, there were these free black men who formed these military units, 1861, early 1862, in support of the United States. Photos had just been doctored. Thirdly, if you look at the Confederate States military records, there is no direct evidence of large numbers of armed black men in service for the Confederacy against the United States. There's literally no evidence of that being true. If you would need, if the numbers that occur at the level that they suggest, of course, that there was, you would need a paper trail of tens of thousands of records and this kind of thing. None of that exists. What do we have evidence of? We have direct evidence of black men enlisting and or attempting to enlist and being denied up through 1863 in the Army of the United States. And by 1863, which brings us to our second point, after the Emancipation Proclamation, a decision by Lincoln and the Army to accept black men into the military, and the formation of the USCT. Eventually, and this brings us to our third point of service, pay, and discrimination. Eventually, nearly 180,000 black men would serve in the U.S. military during the war. This is somewhere near 10% of the entire, quote-unquote, Union Army. And often in non-combat roles. This is partly because of the racist views of the day, assuming that black men were not competent enough to functionally hold those roles. They would be paid less. Units themselves would be segregated. Often their officers would be white. And just because abolitionism, by the time you get to emancipation in 1864, is a goal of the United States, it doesn't mean that racial equality is, which means that these men still faced pervasive discrimination wherever they went. A fourth point for us would be Fort Pillow. The brutalization of black men in the service occurred unabated throughout the war. It was abundantly clear on the part of Confederate whites that, basically, right, so this is the idea of, in some ways, it's even scarier or harder, for black men to be sort of in service here, right? So Fort Pillow was a conflict that took place in Tennessee in 1864, where you have just under 600 U.S. soldiers and about 1,500 Confederate soldiers commanded by General Nathan Bedford Forrest, who will come to eventually lead the KKK. they basically carry out nearly a massacre against the U.S. soldiers, killing about 300 of them. Only about 14 Confederates die, and about 200 of those were black men, were black soldiers. And if you read the accounts of survivors, even for those who had been wounded and were caught, right, they're summarily executed, and in this period. And the fifth example would be the 54th Massachusetts, which was one of the first black units to organize, and is, of course, famed in the film Glory with their attack on Fort Wagner. Despite being held out of combat in many cases, those who did served with honor and with distinction, despite the lack of recognition that they got during the time of the war itself. Thank you.